Erev Tov, great to see everyone. Thank you so much for joining. And this year, in a certain sense, is the sequel to last week's year, where I spoke about some of the themes of Sfirat Omer. And so most of tonight will be new material about the significance of Lag BaOmer and the incredible legacy of Rosh Yochai, and what's the meaning of this day in our tradition, and what does it mean for us today? With regards to the counting of the Omer, we know that this is a beautiful mitzvah for which we have complex feelings. It's an exciting period of growth as we climb the mountain to receive the Torah on Shavuot. But at the same time, Sfirat Omer, this period of time is a mournful period. We don't schedule weddings and we don't get haircuts. And what's the reason why we have these practices of mourning in Sfirat Omer? So one reason is because we memorialized the pogroms of the Crusades in 1096, which decimated the Jewish communities of Speyer, Mainz, and Worms, and which occurred during this time between Pesach and Shavuot. Another reason why we have these practices of mourning is that without the Beit HaMikdash, without the temple, we're missing the Omer barley offering, which is a key component of the mitzvah of the counting of the Omer. And so our mourning is for the fact that we don't have the temple, we don't have the Beit HaMikdash, we're not able to fulfill this mitzvah of counting between Pesach and Shavuot in the optimal fashion. However, the classic reason given is based on the Gemara Yevamot, which says that 12,000 pairs of students, 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died during this time of Pesach and Shavuot, between Pesach and Shavuot. And so that's the reason why we have a lot of the practices of mourning during this period of time. We all know about the significance of a day on the calendar called Lag BaOmer. Okay, Lag BaOmer is this coming Thursday night, Friday. And this coming Thursday night, Friday on Lag BaOmer, on the 33rd day of the Omer, so we're allowed to schedule weddings on the day, and we're allowed to get a haircut. And the Shulchan Aruch says, the Mechaber of Yosef Karo in the 1500s, says that they died, that the students of Rabbi Akiva, these 12,000 pairs of students, died for 33 days and even died on the 34th day. And then a number of students still continued to die on the 34th day, and then they stopped dying. Rav Yosef Karo says, therefore, that on the 34th day of the Omer, that's when you no longer have to observe any practices of mourning because the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. And we'll talk more about who these students were and how we understand that there were 12,000 pairs of students. And we'll suggest a theory regarding that. But before that, the Mechaber says that really there's no significance to the 33rd day of the Omer, but rather it's really the 34th day of the Omer that's significant. Rav Moshe Isserles, the Ramah, also writing in the 1500s, the Ashkenazic authority, he says that the students died until the 33rd day of the Omer, on which that day they stopped dying. So according to the Rav Yosef Karo, according to the Mechaber in Sephardic tradition, the relief or the celebration, or the relief, if anything, is on Lag BaOmer, the 34th day of the Omer, but according to the Ramah, the relief is actually on the 33rd day of the Omer because Pasku Legamre Milamos, they stopped dying. Those who are more advanced, and many of you, and certainly those in Eretz Yisrael, know that there's an additional dimension of Lag BaOmer. And that is that it's customarily assumed to be the yahrzeit, the day of death, of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. In Israel, they have lots of prayers and they light candles and they all travel. They go to the burial place in Meron, the burial place of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. People light bonfires, which represents the fire of the Torah that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai taught during the course of his life. They shoot bows and arrows, or some of the kids play with bows and arrows, these little play bows and arrows. And the reason I read for that is because the bow represents the rainbow, is the rainbow. And the Gemara says that the rainbow, as you know, represents, as the Torah says, represents the covenant that Hashem made with the world. That Hashem, even though things are not going so well in this world, maybe people are not living up to the standards that we should be, but still Hashem will not destroy the world in the way that he did at the time of the flood. So the rainbow is the symbol of the covenant that Hashem has with the world. But the Gemara says that if we see a rainbow in the sky, that's not the best sign, because that means the only reason why Hashem is not punishing the world is because of the rainbow. And the Gemara says that whenever you have a tzaddik, when you have a really, a righteous individual who protects the generation based on his merits, so then it's not necessary. There's not going to be any rainbows. Okay, I'm not sure if this was ever, tested empirically, but that's the Gemara's suggestion that the rainbow is a mixed blessing. And when you have a righteous person, so then it could be that we're not going to see a rainbow because it's the merit of the righteous individual or individuals that protect the generation. So legend has it that it was during the days of Rosh Hashanah that there was no rainbow ever seen because of his righteousness. For this reason, one of the customs on Lag BaOmer is to light fire, signifying the light of Torah of Rosh Hashanah. But also number two, to play with, to handle bows and arrows to represent the rainbow that did not appear during his lifetime. So tradition is that this is his yahrzeit. There's also a tradition that he left the cave on this day. The Gemara tells a story of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai that he had fled the Romans with his son, and they hid in a cave in the city of Pekian for 13 years. They survived on fruit of the carob tree and a spring. And so Lag BaOmer has two dimensions to it on the face of it. Number one, it's the day that the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying. And secondly, it kind of highlights the life and legacy of this Torah giant of Rosh Hashanah Bar Yochai, a Tana who lived around 2,000 years ago. So the question that we could ask is there any relationship between these two reasons? It seems like two totally disparate reasons. Is there any relationship between the students of Rabbi Akiva stopping to die, that the plague ended, and the life of Rosh Hashanah Bar Yochai? The second question one could ask is so if indeed the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying, so then why would that be a day of celebration? I would understand it to be a day of relief, a day where we can start picking up the pieces, but why would it be a day where we celebrate? So I think the secret to Lag BaOmer is found in the Gemara, Samach Beis Amid Beis, and happy to hear your thoughts and questions. You're welcome to put it into the chat box, where the Gemara says that there were 12,000 students, 12,000 pairs of students that Rabbi Akiva had throughout the land. They all died during this period of time, as we mentioned last week, because they didn't show proper respect one to the other. And then the Gemara continues. That's not the end of the story. That the world was desolate, and this was a real blow to the Jewish tradition. Rabbi Akiva and his students, right? They were the ones, the guardians of the tradition, the bearers of the Masorah that were trying to transmit it, to learn it, and to guard it, and to transmit it to the next generation. And when these students passed away, this was obviously a major, major blow to the Jewish people. And so the Gemara says that the world was desolate in a spiritual sense until Rabbi Akiva went to the rabbis in the southern portion of Israel. And he gathered them together and he opened up a new yeshiva. Rabbi Akiva was a rabbi who was the rabbi of hope, of optimism. Rabbi Akiva is the one, you all know this, right? That Rabbi Akiva is the one we read about at the Pesach Seder, where after the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed and Jewish life in Israel has been totally devastated and upended. And Rabbi Akiva is the one who served as the host of the Seder in Bnei Brak. And so Rabbi Akiva was the rabbi, even in the darkest of times, who is able to be the one to teach the students, teach his colleagues how to celebrate freedom. The Gemara says on the last page of Tractate Makot that when the fox, right, the famous story about the fox running out of the temple, and all the other rabbis cried, seemingly appropriately so, and Rabbi Akiva laughed. And long story short, the rabbi said, "Why are you laughing?" And he said, "I'm laughing because now that I know that this prophecy was fulfilled, that there's animals trampling through the Holy of Holies, I now have even greater confidence and greater faith that the other prophecies are going to be fulfilled, and that prophecy that children and elders are going to play in the streets of Yerushalayim, that will also be realized." And they say to Rabbi Akiva, "You comforted us, you comforted us." Rabbi Akiva was the rabbi of hope and optimism. He demonstrates it in that Seder in Bnei Brak that we read about every single year. He demonstrated it in that story that I just mentioned with the fox running out of the Holy of Holies, that he was, of course, a Torah giant. And Rabbi Akiva also taught the Ahavta l'reacha kamocha zeh klal gadol b'Torah, that to love your neighbor as yourself is a great principle of the Torah. And I think we spoke a little bit about that last week. But Rabbi Akiva was someone who was the rabbi of hope. And so Rabbi Akiva here, what did he do? After losing all his students with the yeshiva in shambles, he went to the south and he opened up a new yeshiva. And he gathered together 5 kind of superstar students. And the Gemara says in Yevamot 62b that he brought together Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. Behem hamidu Torah osasha. And it was these rabbis under the leadership of Rabbi Akiva that perpetuated the Torah tradition. And one of these rabbis, it says, is who? Is Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And so in the Sefer, that's the secret that helps lead us to the connection between these two reasons, right? The students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying on the 33rd day of the Omer. And it's also the day that we kind of like celebrate the life and legacy of Rishon Bar Yochai. What's the connection? So now we can begin to understand the relationship between those two reasons, right? Because Rishon Bar Yochai was part of that new generation of students. Rabbi Akiva's new yeshiva, that with hope and optimism he was able to build even after losing all of his students, that's the yeshiva in which Rav Shimon Bar Yochai represented, that new generation of students. In the Sefer Shmona Sha'arim, which is from the son of Rav Chaim Vital, Rav Shmuel Vital, he says, Zman simchaso b'yom lag ba'omer, ki hu echad mechameshes hal tamidav hal gedolim Rabbi Akiva. So in the Sefer Shmona Sha'arim, from the son of Rav Chaim Vital, Rav Shmuel Vital, he says that he points out this connection, that the celebration of Lag BaOmer, about the Rav Shimon Bar Yochai and going to the kever of Meron, right, is connected to the fact that he was one of these 5 students. It's interesting, there were 5 rabbis in Bnei Brak at the Seder, and there were 5 students here, plus Rabbi Akiva in this case, who started the new yeshiva. In the Kaf HaChaim, the Sefer Kaf HaChaim, which is from Rav Yaakov Chaim Sofer, lived in the end of the 19th century, the first part of the 20th century. He was born in Baghdad, ended his life and spent most of his life in Israel, in Eretz Yisrael. So the Kaf HaChaim says that the celebration of Lag BaOmer is Mishum de Ba'oto Yom, on that very day, Samach Rabbi Akiva et Hei Talmidav. He kind of ordained, right? He gave smicha to these 5 students. For Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, who mitalmidav hagadolim, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was one of his leading students, who he ordained and who transmitted the Masorah to during that time. And someone has suggested that it's not just not just that it was the day of death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but maybe it was the day that he was born. But what you see from here is what? That Lag BaOmer is not really, it's not a celebration that the students stop dying. The celebration of Lag BaOmer is that through it all, Rabbi Akiva was able to start over. Through it all, Rabbi Akiva was able to start a revival of the Torah to continue the tradition of the oral law. And Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was one of those students. And so that's why Lag BaOmer became a day to celebrate, right? Because Lag BaOmer is really a day of hope and renewal. It's the day in which we kind of strengthen our belief that the Jewish people and that the fire of Torah will continue burning. If that's the case, that really Lag BaOmer is a time of hope and renewal. So now let's think a little bit more about these students of Rabbi Akiva. Okay, and hopefully you're still with me. You're welcome to put questions and comments into the chat box. But we're building momentum, and we're getting a little bit more excited about the fact that Lag BaOmer is coming up just in a couple of days. And but let's think about these students of Rabbi Akiva. I wonder your thoughts about this, but it always struck me that the 24,000 is a very large number. I mean, is it possible that Rabbi Akiva really had 24,000 students? It's certainly possible, but it's always been an annoying question of mine. The second unclear element is that the way that the students of Rabbi Akiva died, the Gemara says, was an illness called askara. And it's an unusual word. Rashi explains that it was an intestinal illness of some kind. But so the question is, how do we understand this large number of students who passed away? And the second thing is, what maybe is the meaning of this, of the cause of death being askara? Yeah, Ayala, share a thought.
I think that we've discussed before, maybe even last year, about the fact you mentioned that it is said that they died in the war of Bar Kokhba, not just the way we're saying because they were not nice to each other. So they were war heroes in a sense.
Okay. Well, it could be that both are true. Excellent, Ayala. Extra credit to Ayala, because if indeed we did learn it in the past. Thanks for remembering it. That the Gemara says that they died of askara. And the word sikra is the Latin word for sword or dagger. The Sikari were a group of extremists, zealots, who received their name because they would carry these daggers and attack people who held different views than their own. And so we see that sikra, askara, means the sword. And so here's a theory that the students of Rabbi Akiva were killed by askara, by sikari, which means that they were killed by the sword. The Jerusalem Talmud says that Rabbi Akiva was the most prominent member of the sages who supported Bar Kokhba's revolt against the Romans. Rabbi Akiva thought that Bar Kokhba was Mashiach, and he was the one who gave him this surname of Bar Kokhba, son of the star, superstar, son of the star, which is a messianic reference. And so when the Talmud Yevamot records that 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died, perhaps Talmidim doesn't mean students who were learning directly with him, but rather they were followers of Rabbi Akiva, who followed his call to join the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And the resistance began in the year 132 of the Common Era, 60 years or so after the destruction of the temple. They were successful for a few years, but after a brief span of glory, they were defeated. And there was a terrible massacre and defeat at Beitar. And the massive losses took place, according to the Gemara, during this period between Pesach and Shavuot. But so maybe the death of it's not that these were students, but these were followers. And maybe the death of the followers of Rabbi Akiva wasn't through a plague or an intestinal illness, but that they were killed by the sword in their battles against the Romans. And later I found this general theory proposed by a number of scholars, including Rav Yosef Eliyahu Henkin, a leading rabbi in New York City in the 50s and the 60s. He doesn't explain the askara as I just did, but he does say that they were killed in the revolt, that the students of Rabbi Akiva were killed in the revolt against the Romans. And he suggests that the rabbis wrote about it in the Talmud, not explicitly, but only in code, for fear of reprisals. The Gemara adds that they died because lo nahagu kavod zeh b'zeh, they didn't respect one another. And this problem of internal strife was a larger problem that plagued the Jewish people then and still plagues us today. And actually, I think Rav Henkin says that reason, how could it be that they didn't show proper respect to one another? These were the students of Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva taught everyone v'ahavta l'recha kamocha. So that's kind of like that's, in his opinion, that's kind of a code that it must be that there's a different reason why they died. Okay, but the traditional explanation is that that the rabbi saw that they didn't show proper respect to one another. But how did they actually die? So, according to this theory, in Sfirat Omer, we mourn to commemorate the fallen Jews in the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Meitu ba'askara, they were killed by the sword. And these were not direct students, but these were followers who joined the resistance. And this explains the massive number of 24,000. So understood in this way, Sfirat Omer adds a whole new layer of appreciation to our modern national experience. In that Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim celebrate events which are coming full circle from the events surrounding Rabbi Akiva students. Why? Because in Sfira, we reflect upon those Jews who fought for independence from the Romans, and they were unsuccessful and lost their lives, which causes us to mourn. And from that time, for close to 2,000 years, we lacked the independence and the sovereignty that we so desired. And then in 1948, with Hakamat Medina, with Jewish heroism assisted by divine providence, we reestablished sovereignty and independence. 1900 years after Bar Kokhba, we were finally successful in achieving our dreams. Hayinu kecholmin. And in the words of Ambassador Yehuda Avner, we went from being objects with others making decisions for us to becoming subjects who can make decisions for ourselves. And there was a high cost of lives, and that's Yom HaZikaron, but we have Yom HaAtzmaut. And so what the Bar Kokhba rebellion couldn't sustain and restore was finally accomplished in our generation. Our generation finished the job that they started and realized the dreams that they fought for and that they achieved partially, but weren't successful in completely achieving. Understood in this way, Lag BaOmer is really indeed a day of hope and renewal. Understood in the traditional sense, it's a day that, the students of Rabbi Kiva, whether these were warriors or whether these were students in the yeshiva, but after they had died, Rabbi Akiva continued moving forward, and he opened up a new yeshiva. And on a national level, not just on a spiritual, right? Certainly in a spiritual level, on a Torah level, right? Rabbi Akiva opened up a new yeshiva, but also if indeed these students were those who battled against the Romans, so then they were battling for independence and sovereignty, which is something that we've been blessed to achieve, which is through the miracle, right? The miracle of the state of Israel, which we're so blessed to have. Lag BaOmer is a day of hope and renewal. It's the power of Jewish continuity. And really continuity is what counting the Omer is all about, because, right, you have to make every single day and every day counts and you can't miss a day. And so too, every single generation is another link in the chain. And Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim are coming full circle from the followers of Rabbi Akiva. What they were fighting for is what we managed to achieve. And it's interesting, I was thinking about it, that with the celebrations of Yom HaAtzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim, Yom behind us, Yom Yerushalayim coming up on the 28th of the year, we begin to reverse, in a certain sense, the mourning practices of Sfirat Omer. Right? And we still observe mourning during the other days, right? Because of the fallen Jews. And it's still only the beginning of the blossoming of the redemption. Even with our amazing accomplishments for which we express gratitude, we have ways to go. But we begin reversing the process, right? We recognize that we're building upon the sacrifices of previous generations, and we're giving of ourselves to strengthen our link. perpetuate that chain, try to show greater kavod, one to the other. And in a certain sense, the mourning practices, right? So Lag BaOmer, we celebrate is not mourning, because that's a day of rejuvenation. And also on Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim, right? Those are days that we don't have regular mourning. And in a certain sense, right, these days are turning around the mourning into the unfolding process of the redemption. And so that's some of the ideas behind Lag BaOmer, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts and questions about it. But that Lag BaOmer really representing is not just a day that they stop dying and a day that it's Rosh Hashanah's Yortzeit. As significant as those two reasons are, what's the relationship between the two? You ask most people, they say, the students stop dying and it's Rosh Hashanah's Yortzeit. What's the relation between those two reasons? Why would we celebrate the fact that the students stop dying or celebrate a Yortzeit? But understood in this way, now we see that really Lag BaOmer, Lag BaOmer, it's not just that they stopped dying, but Rabbi Kiva picked up the pieces and continued teaching Torah.
So basically, it's the renewal that we are celebrating, as opposed to staying in mourning.
That's exactly right. And I think this message resonates for us today, because we're slowly emerging from this insane past year. And there's a spirit of rejuvenation and renewal in the air, and we're trying to catch the wave and we're trying to build upon the momentum. And we're not out of the woods yet, and we still have to continue being careful. But this notion of the capacity of the human being to renew herself or himself, and the capacity of the Jewish people, who have this incredible continuity to rejuvenate itself, this is what Lag BaOmer is all about. And I think it's this spirit of Lag BaOmer, of rejuvenation, which is why we celebrate, and really something that I think he give us chizuk, he give us strength during this period of time. When we're also, we're asking, there's challenges up ahead, and how are we going to come back together as a community, and how are we going to become even stronger than we were before, and there's certainly uncertainty that lies ahead, but certainly the more connected we are to Hashem, the more connected we are to one another, and if we believe in the human spirit, but in the Jewish spirit, in that spirit of rejuvenation, which is really what Lag BaOmer is all about, is the rejuvenation of the Jewish people. So then then we have a bright future, please God. Interested in hearing your thoughts and questions. Okay, nice. Jerry points out that Lag BaOmer, as a support to the fact that it's a day of renewal in life, is that it's the 18th of Iyar, and that's Chai. Very, very nice. And Rivki
Rabbi
was in Meron at the Kever of Shem Yochai about 51 years ago.
Rabbi,
unbelievable experience. Okay, nice. Yes, Alice, go ahead.
In northern Israel, the city of Ma'alot, on the street signs, it says Ma'alot Peki'in. Northern Israel.
Ma'alot Peki'in, interesting. Ma'alot Peki'in. So this is in northern Israel, and Peki'in is that city where Rabbi Shem Yochai and his son, Rabbi Eliezer, were for many years.
Yes, my grandson lives there. That's why I know.
Oh, your grandson lives there. Very, very nice. Wonderful.
Okay.
I'm telling a story from 2,000 years ago, and you're telling me about your grandson.
Well, it's connected, right?
It is totally connected. That's absolutely right.
Totally
yes, Rivki, go ahead.
My question is that if the students died in battle, that means, they were very brave, and they were very, very good people, that they tried to defeat the Romans to bring back the Beit HaMikdash. And then they say that the students died because of, they did bad deeds. So I don't understand, it's like we're casting aspersion on the students, which is a very negative thing to do. We're saying that they didn't have kavod for one another. They spoke ill of one another. They just weren't good people. And on the other hand, there's another thesis that they were brave warriors. So I have a problem. Why would they have one and the other? Because why cast aspersion on these brave followers if they were brave and courageous and were trying to defeat the Romans. It bothers me that we should speak ill of them.
Could be both.
But how can it be both? How can they be, you know what I mean?
Some of them might have been negative to each other, but they went out to war.
Okay, I don't know. It's not saying that. I'm very concerned that we today, or in the Talmud or whatever, speak ill of these students if they were in fact brave warriors. So what say you, Rabbi?
I think you're making a great point, Rifki, and Ayala, you as well. And I'm not just saying that to be diplomatic. I think I think on the one, we have to be very, very careful before we cast aspersions upon anyone. And we really don't know why bad things happen to good people. But what we do know is, Rifki, is that you can have somebody who's brave, who's courageous, who's a leader, but yet perhaps doesn't give respect, doesn't give proper respect and love and care and support to his fellow Jew or fellow human being. I mean, it is certainly possible to have that together. That's number one. Number two is, what we do know is that there was terrible, terrible divisiveness among the Jewish people at that time. I mean, we know that there was that, as bad as the Romans were in terms of, their destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. We know there was terrible, terrible friction, infighting, internal problems among the Jewish people at that time. Related to that, that's what maybe got the rabbis, saying that the reason why the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed was because of sinas chinam, was the fact that they. Hold on one second, I lost you. Here we go. Okay, something just popped onto my screen. Sorry. Okay, that the reason why the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed was because of sinat chinam. The first temple, the first Commonwealth was destroyed because of these major sins. The second Commonwealth, the Talmud tells us, was destroyed because the Jews could simply, not learn how to get along with one another. So there is, the history does, we know historically that there were there's major divisions among the Jews at that time. I think if it's in that generation and it's happening then, we have to be very, very careful. Maybe this was a couple generations later. And the rabbis were trying to learn something. They were trying to learn something from that, from that terrible tragedy. And when we speak about the students of Rabbi Akiva, and certainly when we speak about the sages, even more so when we speak about the biblical personalities, we have to remember we speak about them with great respect. But yet they're human beings. If you put them, on such a pedestal that they're perfect, so then what does their life have to do with me? How is it relevant for me? At the same point, right, we don't speak about them as if they're, just our friends and colleagues, and because that's not showing them the proper respect. So what I would say is, Rifki, that this was in a certain sense a problem that plagued the Jewish people at that time. And number two, when we speak about the students of Rabbi Akiva, it has to be with respect. But yet it's trying to grow, as individuals and as a community from that tragedy. Somehow the rabbis had a sense of things. It was some tradition passed down that maybe, they didn't show proper respect, of support to one another, and they didn't focus on what brings them together as much as they focus on what separates them. And this is something that plagued, during the days of the Talmud centuries later, and then even all the way until our time. So they were brave, they were courageous, but a couple generations later, the rabbis, kind of understanding the history of that time, and maybe through tradition, with great respect for the students and everything they stood for, was trying to show that maybe they fell short in this area, and we could learn from that. Any other thoughts or comments? I'm sure Albert, I don't have to put you on the spot, but Albert as the chairman of the board of the Federation. So I know you have a lot to say about this topic of Jews learning how to get together and respect one another.
Well, as you say, it's an issue that we're faced today. It's not of the degree that would result in the destruction of the Jewish people as the Roman wars were, but it is an issue today. We have those fault lines today running through even our Los Angeles community among the Orthodox, the Reform, those who side with one political party versus another. We have those same issues today. What's curious about it was just the one question that I had was why the reference to 12,000 pairs of students or soldiers or followers? Was that a reference to the Chavruta idea that really reinforces that they were students as distinct from followers or warriors?
That's what I would say. That comment that there's 12,000 pairs, I think it's a reference. I've always understood it to be a reference to the Chavrutas, the pairs, which is and number two, that these were pairs that they didn't show proper respect to one another. When they were pairs and they should have gotten along, and they weren't able to. And you're absolutely right in terms of our community, in terms of the divisiveness that we have today. And that's, I think a beautiful thing about the shul is that what the shul is supposed to be, and I think we do try to achieve this in Beth Jacob, it's welcoming, it's inclusive, it's non-judgmental, and every Jew is welcome through the doors of Beth Jacob. And the shul is a place where whatever your political leanings are, wherever you're from, whatever your level of background, whatever your level of observance, the shul is a place where really it's the Beit Knesset. It's a place where we all come together. I can't think of too many places in the country today where you could have people of different political leanings from one extreme to the other who could actually be in the same room and get along and have a conversation today. And still, there's been some fraying of that where in terms of the rhetoric, but we have to certainly get back to that point of where really, we see each other as human beings, respect one another, and listen to the perspective of the other, where we could listen and say, oh, I didn't think of that. That's an interesting point you're making. I mean, if you'd be watching a debate of political candidates for president, or for whatever it is, a member of Congress, and in the debate, right, one of them would say, "Oh, you're right. I never thought of that. That's it. His career is over. Might as well just drop out of the race." While in Judaism, we celebrate that. We celebrate when a person could say, "Oh, I didn't know that." Obviously, if you always say you don't know that, then you've no limited knowledge, that's not good either. But Rashi, at times in his commentary, he doesn't comment on every word in every pasuk, but Rashi sometimes points out and says, "I don't know what this word means." Rashi could have just skipped it over and nobody would have batted an eyelash. But Rashi says, "I don't know what that means." And so in Judaism, we celebrate when a person says, "Oh, I didn't think of that. But let me think about that again. Never thought of it in that way." Well, we start getting back to that.
No, it's a great quality, and I know our shul. I know you as the leader of our shul. You do promote the idea of listening, of trying to bridge the gaps. At the same time, it goes on forever. Why do we follow Hillel versus Shammai, right? Because, with Hillel, he listened. We listened. And it's a trait that we need to bring towards the entire Jewish community, not just a specific shul or a specific stream of our beliefs.
That's a great pithy way to say it. Yes, Ayala.
In the Knesset in Israel, if anybody heard what went on today, that would be a good thing to bring in. It was horrendous. terrible, terrible. I don't know what's going to come out of it, but they feel that Bibi's career may be over as of today. We'll see what happens in the next few days, but they're just like on each other's back every minute of every day. It's horrible. So yes, we need to learn to live with each other. And all this does is allow for the Arab parties to become stronger, and the Arabs on the street feel like they're, excuse the expression, Moshe Knakas. They're throwing fire bombs at Israeli homes in East Jerusalem. They're attacking Israeli soldiers at Sha'ar Shechem. They just feel empowered because the Arabs in Knesset think they're going to get a lot of power, and it looks like they're gonna. It's a big problem.
Obviously, big problems in Israel, and we've had a lot of guests over the years who are experts, from Israel, experts on all the external threats, and they spoke the whole weekend about the threat from Hamas and the threat from Iran and this threat and that threat. And many times when I asked them personally, I said, what is the biggest threat to the Jewish people?
We are.
They said it's internal.
Absolutely.
They didn't speak about that because either that's not their expertise, or maybe that's not as exciting, or it's harder to work on, actually. It's harder to work on. But each of them said that that's the bigger threat is, the threat that, the internal divide, and our internal issues. Yeah. Albert, you said it beautifully in terms of Beit Hillel listened.
Right.
Beit Hillel listened to Beit Shammai, and we've learned this in the past that we follow Hillel over Shammai because Hillel knew how to listen, and that's something we need to do more. I like the way you put that. Martin, the bonfires, you asked in the chat in terms of why the bonfires. The bonfire represents the fire of Torah. Of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. And so with that fire of conviction, with that fire of passion and conviction, together with that spirit of listening and respect to one another, emboldened by the faith of the power of rejuvenation of the Jewish people. So hopefully we could experience, just the true simcha of Lag BaOmer, and the, just a complete rejuvenation of the community and Am Yisrael. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much. And, happy Lag BaOmer, everyone.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Rabbi Topp. Are you still there, Rabbi Topp?
Yes, Ricky, I'm still here. Hi.
What was, besides being born or